Good evening, everybody, and welcome all of you to this live program at Orthopedic Principles. Today, our guest of honor is Dr. Saurabh Agarwal from London, United Kingdom. Dr. Agarwal is an orthopedic surgeon based in London, UK. He's specializing in upper limb surgery and trauma. He moved to London in 2004, where he completed his orthopedic surgical training. He then passed his FRC's Orth exam in 2012, followed by the EBOT exam in 2013. Dr. Agarwal is triple fellowship trained, shoulder, elbow, hands, and trauma, undertaken at the King's College Hospital in London, United Kingdom. He's active in research and has done presentations at national, regional, and international level. Presently, he's working as consultant, trauma, orthopedic, and upper limb surgeon at the Princess Royal University Hospital, which is attached to the King's College Hospital NHS Trust. If you've noticed, Dr. Agarwal has delivered a couple of lectures on our channel and has already reached a huge audience. And today it's my great honor to bring back Dr. Saurabh Agarwal for this wonderful live program. Over to you, Saurabh.
Thank you, Dr. Hitesh, for your kind invitation and a very kind introduction. Hello, all, and I thank you for your time. So today we're going to talk about arthroplasty in relevance to proximal humeral fractures. We're going to look at latest updates, evidences, what journals are talking, and our decision making to offer patient a plate, hemi, or a reverse shoulder. Now, for today's discussion, it's going to be hemi versus a reverse because it's an arthroplasty lecture. But in the next lecture, in next few weeks, we'll talk about plate fixation. So I work at Princess Royal Hospital and we're part of King's College Hospital NHS Trust. So these are the things we're going to touch upon: classification of proximal humerus, vascularity, indications for hemi and reverse, latest evidences and updates on fracture-specific prosthesis, the design features, how they're different to the elective prosthesis, and then we'll look at the latest literature, how they're comparing hemi versus reverse arthroplasty. So classification, Charles Neer, father of modern shoulder replacements. So he spoke about 2-part, 3-part, 4-part, and a 4-part fracture dislocations. And then he, in terms of displacement, he spoke about 1 centimeter and 45 degrees, which personally I feel is difficult to interpret. But his class, I put his classification there on the right for you guys to see. And then another classification of note is from Hertel. 2004, he wrote this paper where he spoke about 2 things: his Lego concept, Lego classification, and his predictors of ischemia. So he said, if you consider proximal humerus as 4 parts of a Lego, i.e. head as 1 part, lesser tuberosity as 2nd part, greater as 3rd part, and the shaft as 4th part, then based on the fracture patterns, he described 12 patterns in his paper. And subsequently, pattern number 13 and 14 was added, i.e. the head, if you consider head split, which happens in real life. So effectively there are 14 patterns. And then his predictors of ischemia. This was his work which he elaborated further on Charles Neer's work. So he said that if there's an anatomical neck fracture, and if the calca has gone with the shaft rather than with the head, and if there is a medial soft tissue hinge disruption, i.e. your arcuate vessel has gone, then there's a 97% chance of ischemia in the humeral head. So which takes us nicely to the vascularity. So we know subclavian artery, outer border of first rib, it turns into axillary artery, which then becomes or continues as brachial artery at the lower border of teres major. So important here, axillary artery, it gives rise to anterior circumflex and posterior circumflex. Anterior circumflex that will then run as arcuate artery in the bicipital groove. And then posterior circumflex will run on the sort of inner border of deltoid and supply the humeral head from behind. Now, this slide is important in the sense, again, Nevasia, we know Nevasia portal and shoulder arthroscopy, and Carolyn then went on to quantitatively assess the vascularity to the proximal part of humeral head. So they wanted to know how much blood supply is through proximal circumflex and how much is through the anterior circumflex. Now, posterior circumflex, as you see on the picture there, it has a large lumen. And we know from Poiselius' law that blood flow in a tube, in a vessel, in a lumen is directly proportional to the fourth power of the radius. So as posterior circumflex has a larger lumen, 2/3 of the blood supply to the humeral head is via posterior circumflex. And that kind of makes sense because in a trauma situation, acute artery can get disrupted, or we as surgeons tend to ligate it when we are mobilizing our 3 or 4 part fractures. So posterior circumflex equals 2/3 vascular supply. Then decision making. Now, unlike other fractures, in a proximal humerus, decision making is dependent both on patient and surgeon's factors. So patient's anatomy, fracture pattern, pre-injury functional status, medical issues, and most important, surgeon's own skill level and bias to a large extent dictates what you're going to offer a patient. So let's look at hemi arthroplasty. Now, unlike a hip hemi, shoulder hemi is a completely different prosthesis with completely different outcomes. So is there a role for shoulder hemi in proximal humerus fractures? Answer is yes, but a limited role. And we'll see in the ensuing slides how. So let's look at the history first. So hemi was first done almost 125 years back for tuberculosis, like your hip TB. And most of the credit for thinking and developing a hemi arthroplasty prosthesis goes to Charles Neer. He's the father of modern shoulder replacements. So he sort of thought about avascular necrosis in your proximal humeral fractures. And then he came out with this hemiarthroplasty prosthesis in 1951. And then it took him another 20 years, then designed a glenoid component to make his first total shoulder replacement, anatomic shoulder replacement. So as we said, first prosthesis was in 1893-94. And then so Dr. Neer was credited with 2 things. One was his Neer's classification, other was his Neer's prosthesis. So he spent most of his decades of his working life stratifying the risk of avascular necrosis based on the fracture pattern, fracture severity. So he said in a 4-part fracture, the chances of some element of osteonecrosis is almost 75%. And then he went on to say that if you were to, and we're talking of 1950s, 1960s now, and then he went on to say that if you were to do a plate fixation, that's going to fail. And which means, or even if that fracture was to be managed non-operatively because of AVN, patient will have painful symptomatic shoulder. And the answer would be then to excise the proximal shoulder, proximal humerus, which then means you're leaving patient with a flail shoulder. So to avoid this risk of AVN or a flail shoulder, he thought about and designed this humeral head replacement or hemiarthroplasty in 1951. Then it took him another 20 years, and then he came forward with his Neer's classification, which I put in the previous slides. And then he revolutionized and popularized the idea of doing a hemi for a 3-part, 4-part, or a head spread fracture. And then Hertel further elaborated on this and went on to write that famous paper in 2004, which we have discussed. So let's look at hemi's indication now. So again, this paper by Brendan in last year has put a lot of thought-provoking comments and conclusions about hemi and a reverse shoulder. So what he says is, yes, hemi, there is a role, it's rare. It should be offered to a young person, healthy person, in a shoulder where you cannot repair or reconstruct the 3 or the 4-part proximal humerus fracture. And of course, cuff has to be intact and decent and functioning. He then goes on to elaborate and say that even in a busy shoulder unit, you should not be doing more than 1 shoulder hemi, which is important take-home message, not more than 1 shoulder hemi, because this has consequences. And the consequences are If you do not get the height right, hemi can erode the cuff. If you overstuff, it can erode the glenoid. If the hemi is, so normal hemi retroversion should be around 30 degrees. If the retroversion is more than 40, it's not going to function. Antiversion, if it's going to be, let's say 20 degrees retroverted, so relatively 10 degrees antiverted, if you like, it's going to put pressure on your subscap and it can cause anterosuperior escape through rotator interval. Tuberosity healing is very, very important in a hemi, and your greater tuberosity, especially if it's not put laterally where it normally belongs, and if you put it posteriorly, cuff is not going to function. So that's why hemi is not a benign implant, and it has consequences. It does have a role in a fit, young, active person with a decent cuff, where all attempts at plate fixation of a 3 or a 4-part fracture has failed. Now, in a hemi these days, with modern technology, we've got fracture-specific stems. So hemi, you have an elective stem and you have a fracture-specific stem. So the advantages of a fracture-specific stem are, and this is the fracture-specific stem here, is low profile. It's low profile. So it's less bulky, which means you can put your graft, which means when you put your GT and LT, it should heal up. It has porous coating, again, for obvious reasons, for bone integration. It has a suture collar, as I've shown here, which means you can pass your sutures, which then goes through your GT and LT to allow your tuberosities to heal onto the prosthesis. And then these days, of course, almost all the companies have these platform designs, which mean, God forbid, if you have to convert hemi to a reverse, you don't need to remove the well-fixed stem in the shaft. You just need to take the epiphysis part out, and you can put the epiphysis of your reverse shoulder, as I've shown here. Again, these platform systems now allow you to correct height, so it avoids overstuffing, i.e. excessive soft tissue tension on your LT and GTs. You can correct your version. So we know that hemi is put in a 30-degree retroversion. Reverse should be 0 or at the most 10 degrees retroversion. So you can dial in your versions on these modern platform-based systems. So take-home message for a fracture scenario, at least I feel, and even the latest journal and literature and evidence suggests, you should be using fracture-specific stems, not the elective stems. So again, further looking at this fracture-specific stem, this is your fracture-specific stem. That's your suture collar. See how you can pass your sutures through the collar and then through the tuberosities, and then you can repair your tuberosities onto the stem. Now, do remember, tuberosities should also be attached to the shaft via these sutures, and tuberosities should also be attached to each other. Now, but the most important element in all of this is tuberosities healing onto the stem. So tuberosities have to sort of be very robustly attached onto the epiphysis part of the stem, as shown here. So that when the person is rotating the arm, the tuberosities move with the stem, not relative to the stem. That's an important sort of a point to appreciate. And then let's look at, so far we've seen the indications for hemi, limited indications, the use of fracture-specific stems backed by the current evidence, how we should repair the tuberosities, and why shoulder hemi is not a benign implant, the consequences. So let's look at an example. 60-year-old lady, innocuous fall, fit and healthy. And if you look at, so I put some coronal and axial CT cuts. So if you look at the coronal cut, head is like a shell. Even lesser tuberosity looks comminuted here. And then if you look at the axial cuts, you can see your lesser tuberosity, and especially here in this slice, looks very comminuted. GT may be a sliver, but nothing too exciting. So you almost know that despite your best attempt to repair, there's a small chance you may not be able to. So in your consent, you are going to consent for a plate fixation, but you will also put hemiarthroplasty in the consent, and you will have hemi as a backup in your theater. So when I went in there in the shoulder, I couldn't repair it at least with a plate. So I did a hemiarthroplasty, and I put a post of 1-year X-ray just to show you a couple of things. One, you can see now how greater tuberosity has healed, how lesser tuberosity has healed, Schentel line is maintained, subacromial space is maintained. And again, in your Y view, you can see your LT and GT has healed. So very important, because if your tuberosities do not heal, this prosthesis will migrate proximally. It's like a massive cuff tear. And your only then option is to convert this into a reverse shoulder. So let's look at an example where a hemi fails and what happens. So this lady was 75, had an anterior fracture dislocation, and then it was decided by the surgeon to do a hemiarthroplasty, and they've attempted to repair the GT here. You can see that. But if I take you to the next slide, and you can see on a AP view and especially on a Y view, the tuberosities haven't healed up, and the prosthesis has escaped through the rotator interval and is lying anterior and superior. So there's anterosuperior escape through rotator interval. And then a CT scan was done to look at the glenoid stock. As glenoid stock was good, so it was then decided to convert hemi to a reverse shoulder. Now, even if you look at the post-op X-ray, something doesn't look right here. And then when they got a CT scan, you can see the whole glenosphere has fallen off glenoid. That's where the glenoid is. This is what I've just drawn. So the whole glenosphere seems to have detached. You can again see here, the whole glenosphere has detached. And now you've got 5 big screw holes in the glenoid. So there's not enough glenoid stock there. So then finally the decision was taken to convert the reverse to a CTA type shoulder replacement. So it's basically a spacer. And if you see sort of, it's articulating with glenoid and with the acromion. So it's just for pain relief. Patient is not going to have good movements. So important thing here being, if hemi fails, it does have consequences. So now let's go to the next chapter, reverse shoulder arthroplasty. So as Charles Neer is to hemi, the father for reverse shoulder arthroplasty really is Paul Grimaud from France. So he thought about, so in patients with rotator cuff arthropathy, where there was no cuff left and they had a painful arthritic shoulder, it was Mr. Grimaud who thought about this reverse prosthesis, where biomechanically he could use deltoid for his reverse prosthesis to work. So in 1985, he came out with this trumpet prosthesis, which is here in the picture below, which was essentially a monoblock glenosphere, which was a 2/3 of a sphere. The humeral stem was polyethylene, and it was a cemented glenosphere. And this was first done in 1986. Now, what are the indications? So we know the indications for a hemi just about is young person, active person, decent cuff, where you have a nasty forepart, head is split or head is like a shell, which you cannot do a plate fixation on. For a reverse shoulder, these days people have sort of lessened the age. They are happy and confident to even do reverses in a 65-year-old and above. And then of course it should be a 3 or a 4 part, which cannot be reconstructed. Head split fractures because of vascularity issues. And then all your failed non-operative treatments and your failed plate fixations and your failed nailings and your symptomatic malunions and non-unions and a failed hemiarthroplasty. Of course, age should be at least, you should try and aim for an age to be above 65. In my practice, I even try and do a reverse for a 75, in very few select cases above 70. And then contraindications. So we know reverse relies on a deltoid. So if there's a deltoid deficiency or there's some issues with the axillary nerve, you should be offering it to the patient. Bone stock, glenoid bone stock has to be there. Infections, you shouldn't be doing it. Unwell patients, you shouldn't be doing it. Non-compliant patients, Charcot joints, these are the ones which are contraindications. So same paper by Brendan J. Kelly, who spoke about hemi, and now let's see what he thought about reverses. So he, in his paper, he summarized all these various studies in almost last sort of 5 to 6 years, and consistently all these studies are showing reliable, predictable, good results when you offer patient a reverse shoulder in a proximal humerus fracture situation. For example, in one of these studies which I've highlighted, they were getting very good sort of, so consistently they're getting very good sort of forward flexion ranging from 120 to 140, external rotation from let's say 20 to around 27, 30 degrees, and your complication rates are between 10 to 15% in reverse shoulders. Remember 10 years back, we were talking of around 25% complication rate. Now we are talking in tune of around 15%. Same paper, and now they've compared your reverse shoulders to your hemiarthroplasty. And their conclusion was better functional outcomes are seen in patients with reverse shoulder, whereas clinical complications and reoperation rates are worse in hemi. So again, lots of studies. I've circled a few, reverse versus a hemi, reverse versus a hemi. And you can see consistently in all these studies, your movements are better in a reverse, but your complication rates are as high as almost 30% in some studies with a hemi. And your reoperation rates, again, quite high, 13% in one study, 25% in another study. So hemi, not a benign implant. When it goes wrong, conversion to a reverse is fraught with problems, complications. Same paper, now they go on to compare a primary reverse versus a secondary reverse, again in a proximal humerus fracture situation. And again, the conclusion was, compared to a primary reverse shoulder arthroplasty, these indications result in a higher complication rate, higher reoperation rate, and lower functional scores in a secondary reverse shoulder replacement. So secondary means if you've done a hemi for a proximal humerus and it fails, then you convert it to a reverse. The complication rates will be much higher, and the functional scores and patient satisfaction scores will be lower. So again, they put a lot of studies, and on the right hand 4 columns, if you see, that's primary, secondary, and consistently, if you do so patient selection and you offer a primary reverse shoulder replacement, your movements are better compared to your secondary, and your complication rates are lower compared to a secondary. So the conclusion of this paper was reverse, predictable results, reverse better than a hemi, primary reverse better than a secondary reverse. So another paper by Shukla, he did a meta-analysis where he compared hemi to a reverse shoulder, again in situation of setting of proximal humerus fractures. And he looked at 7 parameters. He looked at healing of tuberosities. He looked at function in terms of forward flexion, abduction, external rotation, and all those patient satisfaction scores. And for a reverse shoulder, his conclusion was, for a reverse shoulder, out of these 7 parameters, reverses p-value was significant in terms of favorable outcomes for reverse compared to a hemi. So consistently, we are seeing in all these studies in last 5 to 10 years, reverse shoulder is doing better than a hemiarthroplasty. But in the same breath, he goes on to end this paper saying, reverse shoulder arthroplasty continues to be associated with a set of unique complications, including scapular notching, acromial fracture, and a high incidence of implant instability. So even though reverse is a better implant, predictable results compared to a hemi, it still has its own issues like scapular notching, like acromial fractures, like deltoid fatigue. So reverse is not an implant to be taken lightly and to be offered to every 70-year-old who walks into your clinic with a 4-part fracture. Then another study which compares hemi versus a reverse, and again, similar results. So they found again statistically significant results, refunction and your scores. So the conclusion of all these studies was clinically significant and statistically significant superiority of your reverse shoulder over a hemi. Results for revision of a failed hemi converting to a reverse are unpredictable. However, reverse shoulder has its own unique complications. So one should be aware of this and use this implant also judiciously. And longer follow-up is needed for reverse. We need further data, further longer follow-up, 15-year follow-up, 20 years follow-up to see how they are doing. Then, so let's now add another dimension now. So Pascal Bolu, very famous name in shoulder world, again 2019 paper. Now he looks at tuberosities. Now so if you were to ask me 5 years back, do we need to attach tuberosities onto a reverse shoulder? I would have said, no, there's no need. Reverse is relying on a deltoid. You don't need your GT, you don't need your LT. All you need is your teres minor to give you that bit of external rotation to eat your food. But now the evidences are changing. All the latest literature in last 3-4 years seem to suggest we should make an effort to attach the tuberosities, your GT and LTs, even in the setting of a reverse shoulder. And we'll see why. So these are the pictures from his paper. And if you sort of look at the picture B, you put your reverse prosthesis, you're attaching your GT. And then if you look at your picture D, you attach your LT, your supra from the top and your GT from behind. Now, few things to note here. First, if you were to attach your supraspinatus, remember we are inferiorizing your reverse shoulder. Now, that means you're really stretching your supraspinatus. So at least in my practice, I partly or completely incise the supraspinatus because I feel I'm going to make my shoulder very tight. But I make every effort to attach my greater tuberosity in the correct position, in the lateral position, not posterior, so that my infraspinatus heals, which gives my patient some external rotation. And then I make every effort to attach my LT, my subscap, which sort of balances reconstruction and healing in the setting of a reverse shoulder for proximal humerus fractures improves the movements, forward flexion, external rotation, improves patient scores, patient satisfaction. And as a bonus, it also reduces the risk of instability, those subtle instabilities, reduces the risk of infection and prosthetic loosening. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If my GT and LT heals, if my infra and my subscap heals, it should make my shoulder stable. It should set up sort of like that milieu where my pseudo capsule can form. It should act as a barrier to infection. If shoulder is stable, it should reduce prosthetic loosening. So latest evidence, latest update, make every effort to attach your tuberosities. Whether you keep your supraspinatus or you incise it is up to you. In my practice, I do incise it because I feel I'm making my shoulder very tight. And this is what I have put some boxes here for you guys to later see. So like your hemi, let's look at the fracture specific stem in the setting of a reverse shoulder. So that's an elective hemistem, fracture hemistem, elective reverse stem, and fracture reverse stem. So it is exactly the design rationale and the principle and the advantages are exactly same as your hemi-fracture stem. So I put a magnified version here. So if you see there's porous coating, which allows your bone integration. It's less bulky, which allows you to put your graft there to allow your GT and LT to heal up. And your suture collars, like I showed you in the hemi slides, you can pass your sutures there, which allows your tuberosities to hug your stem and allows it to move with the stem when patient externally and internally rotates. So latest current update, use fracture specific stems, not elective stems in the setting of a trauma. So let's look at the complications. So as I've been saying, reverse shoulder better than a hemi, but still not a benign implant. We still do not fully understand this implant. We still do not have very long-term results. So now this is again an important slide. While complication rates of a reverse shoulder are higher than a plate fixation when you're consenting a patient, But important to appreciate is the reoperation rate in a reverse shoulder is far lower than your plate fixations or your nailings. So 5% in a reverse compared to 13% in a plate fixation. So plate, again, in a setting of 3-4 part fracture is not sort of, it has problems. Shoulder settles, screw penetrates, screw can back out, plate is high, it starts impinging. There are issues with plate fixation also, which we'll see in our next lecture. So unfortunately, in a proximal humerus, whether you offer a plate or a hemi or a reverse, every implant has issues and sort of patient selection is very important. And similar thing, revision and reoperation rates are lower in a reverse than a hemi, which we know, which we've discussed before. So let's look at some complications. So most common complication is either subtle instability or a frank dislocation, which you see here. So again, someone has kindly lent me these slides. If you see, this had dislocated, if I remember, I think next day or sort of after surgery, within few days. So if you look carefully, some of you with keen eyes, glenosphere should be in the, it should be inferiorized. It should be in the inferior 2/3. We should try and use a big glenosphere. We should try and use an eccentric glenosphere to make your shoulder stable. And then thickness of polyethylene, I put a question mark because we can't see it on an X-ray, and I do not know whether it was thin or thick or was it adequate size or not. Either ways, this was revised. And then now if you see, looks like polyethylene was thin and now they put a thicker polyethylene. And if you see this sort of slide, you can see they put an eccentric glenosphere now and a larger glenosphere. So these are the few things in your hand when you're revising a sort of a dislocated shoulder, reverse shoulder. These are things you can play with to inferiorize your deltoid, to further medialize your deltoid, so that you have put some tension in the deltoid fibers, like your abductors in a hip replacement or a hip hemi, and hopefully that keeps your shoulder stable. Then I think this is the last example. So another sort of patient 84, you can see it's a 4-part anterior fracture dislocation. And if you see this sliver of bone, this is actually from the glenoid. And there was a 40% anterior glenoid bone loss. And if I show you these slides, you can see on an axial cut here, there's an anterior glenoid bone loss. And now in this slice, you can see this is all from glenoid. It couldn't have come from the humeral head. And when we opened the shoulder, it was done as a joint case. There was a 40% anterior glenoid bone loss. Again, another slice to show anterior glenoid bone loss. So on table, we've taken this autograft from patient's own humeral head, and this is just to show the principles. That's the graft. You temporarily hold it with 2K wires. This is the wire for your, so I use a delta extend in my practice. So I put a central wire for my metaglean. Now, before you put all these 4 screws in the metaglean, it's better to change these 2 wires to 2 compression screws so that this graft compresses onto the native glenoid. And you can see here, these are the 2 screws we put to compress it. And then I've got the x-rays of this patient post of 3 months. And you can see the graft has taken nicely to the glenoid and these 2 screws are there in situ. So just the principle that in a trauma situation, you can use patient's own humeral head to graft it and how you graft it. So in summary, careful patient selection is important because none of the implant, whether a hemi or a reverse or even a plate, is benign. They have their own set of complications with consequences. Latest update and evidence use fracture specific implants because of porous coating and they are less bulky, so they help with tuberosity healing. Hemi, it should be rarely offered to a patient. Busy shoulder surgeon, busy shoulder unit, 1 hemi a year, not more, unless you are in a really heavy unit. And of course, cuff should be decent, otherwise hemi is not going to work, and tuberosity healing is the key. Reverse shoulder, all these studies now in last 5 to 10 years are saying it's better with predictable outcomes, but do think of long-term results, do think of revision burden for your colleagues in the future. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Saurabh, for yet another brilliant lecture from your side and really amazing case examples. Couple of questions, Saurabh. Saurabh, do you think we are doing more arthroplasties than an internal fixation? For example, we have more specialization, we have more shoulder arthroplasty surgeons, and do we have a bias towards doing more arthroplasty for something that can be easily salvaged with an internal fixation? For example, in a typical anatomical neck fracture, we are reasonably sure that there's going to be a high incidence of an osteonecrosis where an arthroplasty is reasonable, or in a fracture dislocation where again an arthroplasty could be reasonable because of the high incidence of an AVN. Other than that, do you think are we over treating our proximal humeral fractures with an arthroplasty?
Yes, it's a very good question, Hitesh, and very relevant and very true. So this is the price we pay when we super specialize or subspecialize. So if you pick up any journals or literature from Europe as opposed to UK, we are doing far more reverse shoulders compared to us people in London or UK. For the reasons you just said, because one, plate fixation involves skills. And then there's always this problem of, okay, my humeral head will settle down, my screws can penetrate, AVN can happen. So it's very it's easy to err towards a reverse shoulder because we at least know 10-year results are good now. And hence we are over treating. And I agree with you. And at least in my practice, one should endeavor to do a plate fixation first. I feel nailing doesn't have a lot of role in shoulder work, in trauma work, which we'll discuss in the next lecture. So I try and make every effort, if I can, to do a plate fixation first, because even if plate fails, I still have an option of converting it to a reverse. But if a reverse fails, it becomes a big problem. You do not have a lot of options. So yes, totally agree. Because of super specialization, we are erring towards over treating and maltreating, if I may say that.
Thank you, sir, for that. And if you look at data from even Pascal Bolio, say somewhere between 2000 to 2010, the complication rates of a reverse shoulder were somewhere between 15 to 20%. Okay. Of late, due to better designs and improved understanding about the shoulder biomechanics, the complication rates have come down significantly. And what has been your experience? Like, what are complications that you have had in your personal cases?
So again, very good question. Anecdotally, I can say, so in my practice, I do 10 to 15 reverses a year, not a lot, both for elective and trauma combined, not a lot. What I have seen is, so even though subtle instability is the most common complication, so one should make that's why I put that example very deliberately, that unless you inferiorize your glenosphere, even put a larger glenosphere, a eccentric glenosphere, which then means reduction and becomes difficult, but it is very important to get your components right. Now, in my 5 years of being a consultant here in King's Trust, I would have done around 50 to 70 maybe shoulders. I've not had an instability or a dislocation so far, touch wood, but I've had my own share of complication. One, I clearly remember stiffness is a big issue. So if your patient is lost to follow up and they don't turn up and they're not moving shoulder, they become stiff, and it's a big problem. Recently, I had a problem with nerves. Now, it was not so the problem is a strange one. I still haven't got a proper answer to it, but I've just brought it up. It was not near the brachial plexus, not near the cords, not where I operated. Looks like this lady had a massive swelling in her forearm. I'm not sure why it happened. I was in India for 6 weeks, actually. This is when it has happened. I'm still looking into it. And when I do my next lecture, I'll bring her case up and I'll discuss for everybody's benefit. All I could gather was she had a huge swelling in the forearm, and somehow I think median and ulnar nerve, 2 nerves have got involved, and it was not compartment syndrome. So I really can't explain it was going on there. But once I've got but I've done my MRI to brachial plexus and my nerve conduction studies, shoulder area was fine. So I can't explain this nerve finding, but it's an interesting one, which I'll bring it up. Other issue sometimes that happens is acromial fractures at 1 year. Now we in UK, because the way NHS works, we discharge them around 6 months. At the most 1 year, that also you have to hide under table and bring them back. So I wouldn't know if my patients had acromial fractures or not, or stress fractures, like they have not come back to me. So what I'm trying to say here is, if done, if you take your time and done properly, and with all the NGR data from Sweden and Denmark, we know the complication rates now or survival rates of a reverse is almost as comparable to your hips and knees, 90% at 10 years. And they do well, actually. They get good movements, they get a stable shoulder. But yes, here or there, you will have some complications.
Thank you, sir, for that. And the other question is, there is a real concern about the particular organism called as Cutibacterium acnes. There's a lot of discussion happening about this particular organism, Propionibacterium acnes or Cutibacterium acnes. So what are the special precautions that you take in your shoulder arthroplasties to reduce the incidence of this particular organism?
So again, a very good question. Obviously, all the theatre precautions, theatre personnel should be restricted to minimum. They should come from a side door. Inflow, outflow of nurses in and out should be restricted to minimum. Other than that, from surgeon's end, you have to give antibiotic on time. So half an hour before induction to have good tissue perfusion before you start cutting your skin. I personally use ChloroPrep. So it has a higher concentration of chlorhexidine. So I will clean the whole shoulder, especially the axilla, before I go to scrub. So it allows your alcohol to evaporate, and then I will come and do my usual cleaning. Then I would take a Ioban and put it in the axilla. So I'll cover the whole shoulder with the Ioban. That's another precaution. When you're closing the wound, again, you can I take liquid chlorhexidine before I'm stitching the fat and skin. I would give antibiotics after surgery. I would instruct my junior doctor that when you're reducing the the pressure dressing after 2 days, to use proper ASAP, proper gloves, not the routine gloves. And I think that's just about. We don't have ring fence wards here, beds here. That will help, but ring fencing also helps. So those are the precautions I normally take.
Thank you, Saurabh. I think that's all the questions that we have for this session, Saurabh. Thank you for the fantastic lecture, and I'm sure this lecture is going to benefit a lot of people all over the world. Thank you so much for joining in, Saurabh.
Thank you, Dr. Hitesh, for